I know it's probably rather difficult for you to understand this rather simplistic YouTube video, which is done by me sitting cross-legged on the floor and pointing my camera at the sofa, which has a bit of a green screen laid upon it with a deck of cards, is in fact like the third take of this one particular video. Okay, let me just try and like clear things up, because I'm going back to some of my older ways of thinking, some of my older ways of exploring the world, but of course refined by the experience of being older, more clear-minded, and of course more intellectually complicated, and of course less passionate than I used to be. For that reason, I'm showing you the wonderful and amazing Golden Dawn Tarot, which is one of my favorite tarot decks. Why is it one of my favorite tarot decks? Is because it is hilarious. Okay, the images are hand drawn, they look hand drawn, they're very bad artistically, okay, but they have a certain level of power because hand drawing tarot cards was in fact a tradition within some particular occult movements for the purposes of teaching you to learn, rather than, or rather like I should say, the purposes of drawing an icon or writing an icon within Christian art. So these things look hand-drawn. The quality on them is hand-drawn, and not brilliantly so. But it's to point out that that was how people learned about the symbols. I mean, let's say you had a model of the way the spiritual world works, based upon some ancient Judeo-Christian ideas. Yes, it is part of the Christian tradition, but running alongside the Christian tradition in its own respects, namely the Tree of Life. And you wanted to get to understand what the paths between the spheres meant, what the spheres themselves actually meant. You would then give yourself the task of choosing a set of images, which has been connected as a result of accident to the tarot itself, and to the Tree of Life itself, through using tarot. Sorry, that's been connected to the Tree of Life by way of accident, which happens to be the tarot. Okay, that's the way in which it's done. So you take an image which has astrological associations, which has all kinds of other associations, and you would work out how you would draw it, how you would paint it, what kind of colors and shape and forms you would use. And there are tarot readers today who would use all kinds of things, even photographs, as a way of trying to work out what something would mean. Now, this particular tarot deck works in its own its own language, its own particular form of language, based upon the spiritual ideas, the religious ideas, which were part of the Golden Dawn movement, some of which do cover the Judeo-Christian concepts. Some of the court cards, for instance, the characters have wings, and that is to say that they are part of the angelic host. There are 7 cards within the court cards that have wings. Okay? Why is that? They are representing the 7 planetary energies of the older spiritual occult system, which maps onto your chakras in descending order, if I can remember it correctly. The sun being the crown, then the moon being the third eye, the throat being Mercury, heart being Venus, solar plexus being Mars. Then you go down further and you get down to the orange chakra, and that's Jupiter, which, if you understand your chakras, runs the energy or rules over the energy which flows through the whole body. That's why it's a Jupiterian rulership energy. And then, of course, your red chakra with the Saturnian type energy or color, and so on and so forth. And no, your red chakra is not evil because it happens to be associated with the planet Saturn. Okay, but that's interesting. If you remember, in some forms of occult literature, it mentions the casting of the circle through the summoning of the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. That's a Jewish tradition, strangely enough, which is often being performed by all these people within paganism and within occultism, who are often rather anti-Semitic, which I think is really rather interesting. And those 4 archangels were supposed to be the 4 archangels who dealt directly with God at the time of the flood within the Bible. So those were the 4 good archangels, okay, and the rest of them, maybe they're a bit shady, or they had different purposes, okay. So the use of angels and the meaning of angels as a symbol, as a form of literary device or artistic device, has different meanings. That's my whole point in explaining that, and the fact that this is still connected to the Judeo-Christian tradition. So this is not a bad tarot deck, it's not an evil tarot deck, it's a very good religious tradition. Now, there's often the use of geometric shapes. Note the triangle in this particular Hanged Man, and of course the cross. And these connect not only to their meaning geometrically, and also numerologically, because there's 3 sides or 3 corners to a triangle, and therefore it has a connection to the meaning of anything which has 3 in it, such as, well, anything. I'll leave that to your imagination. But it also connects to positions on the tree of life. Okay, so your triangle could refer to the top 3 spheres, and the symbolism which you build your association of, or you research the meaning of, for your own religious stroke spiritual experience practices. So a lot of the ideas present in this tarot deck, it's not really there for divination. Sure, yeah, I mean, it is a divination deck. Every single pack of cards in the world is a divination deck if you use it right, but the emphasis here is much more on spiritual or religious training, using symbolism, the energy, the characters of all the various cards and what they're referring to, taking into account the way, of course, the Golden Dawn interpreted spirituality. Okay? In some respects it's just very beautiful, in some respects it's more meaningful, in some respects it's encouraging you to find the meaning. The fact that the art is, or looks hand-drawn, doesn't tell you that this is good art. It tells you that you need to start writing down your symbols yourself, you need to start drawing the symbols yourself, you need to start working on your understanding of the symbols through your own hard work, your own dedication. But it still, can be used within your own spiritual methods to focus, to meditate, to contemplate, to understand, to identify. And that's one of the reasons why it's good. Did I ever use this tarot deck in divination? In my early days, yes. Okay, this is one of the tarot decks that I used during like my first year being a full-time professional tarot reader. I'm obviously now 11 years full-time professional tarot reader, and so I've gained in experience and I've gained in knowledge. And I did only in those days, that's why I separated out the delightfully boring pip cards that we have here with the Golden Dawn Tarot with the major arcana and the court cards, and I would just use that. Okay, and that was the pack of cards I used. If you actually look very closely at the as to what the edges of the cards look like, you'll actually see that the bottom part, which is my major arcana and court cards, are more worn than the upper cards, okay, because I used it so much and so exclusively in those old days. It taught me a lot. It gave me a lot of contemplation and a lot of good inspiration. I mean, the very way that the Magician is interpreted by this one particular, I want to call it an author actually rather than necessarily an artist, is much more to do with ceremonial magic, really, if you think about it. Okay, it's very much that kind of interpretation. And the symbols of healing, the symbols of medicine and learning associated with it, which is on his chest, and also the mercurial symbol above speaks about him either going on some kind of healing journey or him helping to heal others with his knowledge of the way the world is, the material world, and so on and so forth. Okay, the tools he's using on his journey. It is a tarot deck which speaks about goodness and trying to bring goodness into the world, but it's not exclusively following the Catholic Christian style tradition, which something like the Oswald Worth Tarot did, when it portrayed the energy of Mary with her foot upon the crescent and her 12 stars above her. Okay, instead we got something much more moving away from that, but still heavily connected to it, as if to bring forward, such as to the image of the 7 archangels, the Apocrypha, the unpublished biblical writings, and to bring that into some kind of mainstream. One would assume that the Golden Dawn was relatively esoteric, namely separated from the rest of the world at the time in its early days, so it didn't really want to upset society, But of course, these ideas are now out there for anyone to pick and choose. It's not a question of being like, rebelling against Christianity or whatever. It's a question of accepting the fact that there are broader interpretations and broader meanings and much more ways in which you can look at the same thing and try and understand where it's coming from. Okay, now a little bit about me, just talking between me and you. Okay, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm kind of like going back to some of my older ways of thinking. Okay, because in some respects I've been necessarily skeptical. Okay, my throat's going a bit hoarse, I've been doing a lot of talking today. I've been necessarily skeptical in order to try and make sure I didn't fall into any pitfalls. I've been trying to encourage people to be skeptical because I didn't want them to fall into any pitfalls either. And now what I'm trying to do is to use my skepticism appropriately, but not to use that to blank me off completely, because the spiritual experiences are still real, okay? And they point to something, and I'm starting to get more involved with that. I'm even like going back to things on my own personal side of things, such as more in the way of energy work, more in the way of using the pendulum, and trying to look more at the kind of like informational level associated with the whole etheric experience. So I'm kind of changing as a person. I'm kind of like trying to bring about within my life, okay, a bit more of a spiritualistic, okay, more of a kind of like a magical but in a different way of life. It's not a question of ritual tools and accessories, it's just a question of like engaging consciousness with the universe in a different way. And I think that this is going to be an interesting part of my own personal journey. But I'm still, well, I've always been, I still think for myself, I'm still a professional tarot reader. I haven't changed in all that way, but I'm kind of like using the symbolism that I'm associated with to help me to be receive revelation, so to speak. In order to overcome things that have been holding me back, so to speak, to set me out on a new journey, so to speak, for my own personal healing and for the healing of others. And I got a lot of willpower to achieve it. This is how a tarot reading story evolves. You see, the symbols come up and then you start to bring them into the story. And as with everything in my life, I'm kind of alone with my wisdom. You know what I mean? But I can see things that other people cannot. And it's all about change. Just a question of what am I going to turn into, and how I'm going to use my intelligence and clear-mindedness in a way that will be good for me and good for the rest of the world. And then it's a question of what position that will place me in. Nick Dutch, professional tarot reader, out for now.